the Eason Book Club on the Pat Kenny Show, sharing book recommendations with book lovers every month.
So for this month's Eason Book Club, we chose Yours Cheerfully by A.J. Pearce. So what did our panel think of the book? They join me now to talk about it. Claudia Carroll, who selected the book, Stephanie Preisner and Keith Walsh are all very welcome to the programme. So we go to you, Claudia, first of all. What is this book all about?
Well, just to tell you a little bit about it, Yours Cheerfully is set in London in 1941, the height of the Blitz, and our central character is Emmy Lake, who's a wartime advice columnist. She's like something straight out of an old black and white Pathé newsreel, and uses phrases like, oh, you're an absolute brick, and chin up, mustn't grumble, and don't be a gloom bag, which I just found hysterical. But the reason why I chose this particular book is it's a direct follow-on from last year's massive bestseller, which was Dear Mrs. Bird. Same character, same location. And it had a beguiling charm to it. It was the lighter side of historical fiction. Horrendous things are happening around these characters. It's the Blitz. There's bombs raining down on them. Every day telegrams are arriving saying, bad news, your loved ones aren't coming home. Children are being evacuated. Women are trying to keep the show on the road while the men are off at the front fighting. And the second book, Yours Cheerfully, deals with that. Emmy, our plucky heroine, has been recruited by the Ministry for Information to help recruit women to the war effort, to work in munitions factories, shift work, the fire service, the auxiliary territorial service, just to help win the war. And she encounters face-to-face real challenges that war workers faced. For instance, women doing exactly the same job as men did, but for considerably less pay. Would that had changed in the meantime, Pat? They're trying to juggle shift work with maybe having small families, no one to care for them. Women are having to bring their young children into the factory. And our central character, Emmy's positivity and determination and grit help win the day. But sadly, I found this particular book, I kept waiting on the plot to take flight and to take off and catch fire. And it didn't take off in the way that Dear Mrs. Bird, the original book, did. I just wonder what the panel thought.
Okay, I have an aversion to characters called Bunty for whatever reason. But anyways, Stephanie, we'll go to you first. What did you think of Yours Cheerfully?
Same. Like, maybe I would have preferred the first book, but I didn't read it. I didn't know this was a sequel. So if you haven't read the first one, you don't need to. And if you like books where characters are called Bunty and it's all very quintessentially British and, they're all, very quaint, and I just found it very tedious. Like, when someone is telling you a story in real life and they're giving you every tiny detail and you're biting your lip being like, oh my God, get to the point. What happened? What actually happened in this story you're telling me? And I think it's something to do with the fact that, like, I kind of wanted to know what was happening in the war. I don't really like books where, people are determined and the war is raging on in the background and we're seeing the sort of smart resourcefulness of how people are dealing with their rations. I kind of wanted to know what was happening in the war. I found it a little bit tedious, and it was jolly good. And if you like jolly good books, then you should definitely give it a go.
The question about someone being an advice columnist, an agony columnist in a publication called Woman's Friend during the war, you just wonder, did that go on, or did the journalists or the editors in such publications make it all up? Because you can't imagine someone has the bombs whistling around them in the Blitz, sitting down, and there was no email, of course, so it's pen to paper, and they've got to write, Dear Woman's Friend, I'm having problems getting my jelly to set. Did people do that? Did such agony columns, or were they seen as maybe keeping the chin up, as it were, during the war? So this kind of trivia helped people to maybe get away from it all for a little while.
I mean, I don't know.
No one knows. No one knows the answer to that.
No one knows.
I don't.
I
that's
do
for
think,
sure.
I do think that there are people who are living through, current wars that, you do get the sense that people are like, well, life goes on. I don't know if it's as, trivial as, oh, I can't get my jellyfish set, but I do think that there is a sense in this book that kind of life just went on and people were still getting engaged and getting married in the middle of this. So I would believe that these columns probably did happen.
I mean, some of the actual questions that the author has given us. Dear Yours Cheerfully, I'm in the WAF, the WAAF, and had a day off yesterday, so I decided to treat myself to a film. None of the other girls were free, so I went on my own. The cinema was full, and I ended up next to a man who couldn't keep his hands to himself. I told him 3 times to stop it, but in the end, I had to get up and leave. I feel angry with myself that I didn't do something more. I'm not feeble, but all I wanted was a nice afternoon to myself. I went home feeling quite humiliated. What should I have done? And that's from L. Hayward, brackets, Corporal.
There you go. Me
what
too.
Should she
back
have
in the
done?
40s.
Yeah.
Called the police.
It's people populated with items like that. Keith, what did you think?
Yeah. Look, I'm just glad I'm not the only one that didn't that just didn't float my boat. It's complete flight of fancy and escapism, and just not for me. Like, I actually thought maybe this is, if I looked at this like a Jeeves and Wooster thing or a bit of Evelyn Waugh, I could enjoy the humour in this or something. But there was a moment where Emmy's fiance to be or whatever they were together wasn't able to make it home for a weekend, and she'd been really looking forward to this. Him coming home, and he had to make that phone call and say, sorry, I won't be able to make it home this weekend. And she was counting down the days, and at one point she went, God, I'm browned off. And she said, bloody war. And Charles said, bloody war. And they both laughed because Charles would never swear in front of a woman, and her parents would be horrified to hear her swearing. And just the fact that this, in the middle of a war, there's bombs raining down, her friend Bunty's fiance is dead, and she's concerned about the fact that she said the word bloody and what would her parents think of it. So that just kind of like, I just couldn't believe it. I couldn't really get into it. But if you like, I suppose there's some nice messages tucked in there. And the women, the female characters are much more resilient and much more interesting than the male characters. Who the men are actually going off to fight the war, and the women just seem much more interesting. Maybe that's just the way the book is written. But yeah, if you're just into complete escapism and you want to escape the real world, and I would recommend this for you.
I can feel the shock reverberating around that. Keith actually is less damning of this book than the two women.
I was trying to be the positive one here.
I have a text here. My mum is called Bunty, and she is very cheerful. I wonder if you go through life with a name like Bunty, are you almost destined to be cheerful?
You're destined to be an absolute brick. They would say.
That's the character. But it's funny because Bunty, it put me to mind of those comics, like the Bunty, the Four Marys, the Jolly Hockey Sticks. You know, those sort of, maybe I'm showing my age now, but those comics that were around, I had 4 sisters, so that's all I got to read. But it was all that sort of like Four Marys and Jolly Hockey Sticks that I just, it's endearing a little bit, you know what I mean?
That's a great name, though. Great name for a character. I think I chose this one because we've had a lot of thrillers and a lot of darker books on book club this year. Fabulous reads. And I just thought it would be a contrast for the summer. But apologies to everybody, that didn't go down very well.
Well, it has a fine publisher in Picador. It's called Yours Cheerfully by A.J. Pearce, and it's available now. If this rocks your boat, so be it. Now, Keith, we're back to the darker side for your options, because Eason have given us 4 books to consider for September. The first one is The Madness of Crowds by Louise Penny. It brings us into post-pandemic Canada, where the ideas of a controversial statistics professor are dividing the nation. Despite outcry in some quarters, Professor Abigail Robinson is permitted to give a lecture at a Canadian university where she argues for the sterilisation of the frail and disabled in order to conserve the planet's resources. The protagonist is Chief Inspector Armand Gamache, who pleaded with the university authorities to cancel the lecture, and he faces a dilemma when he's tasked with investigating the discovery of a woman's body at a party which had been attended by Professor Robinson. So was the killing motivated by hatred towards the professor's ideas or by a desire to protect her from the hatred of others? That's number 1. Number 2, Mrs. March by Virginia Fite Toe. Mrs. March is wife of George Marsh, whose latest novel has taken the New York literary scene by storm. When she unwittingly learns that she's the inspiration for the book's unlikable protagonist, she runs away in distress. It's then that Mrs. March begins a harrowing journey that starts within the pages of a book, but may uncover both a killer and long-buried secrets from her past. Number 3, The Ex-Husband by Karen Hamilton. Charlotte Wilson and her ex-husband have lived a life of crime, but only stealing from the wealthy. When her ex-husband winds up dead on a cruise ship, Charlotte finds herself trapped at sea with a tormentor who threatens to expose her crimes. She finds herself in, it's a pun, uncharted waters, with nowhere to run and nowhere to hide. And the final one, The Dark by Emma Houghton. After suffering a personal tragedy, A&E doctor Kate North leaps at the opportunity to work at a research facility in Antarctica where she'll be replacing the previous doctor who died in a tragic accident. However, as time goes on and Antarctica descends into complete darkness, Kate soon suspects that his death may not have been accidental at all. The more questions she asks, the more dangerous it becomes. So, 4 kind of whodunits, mysteries and so on. And Keith, it's up to you to decide which one. We'll catch up with you over the weekend and see which book you will decide for our September read. So thanks to one and all, Claudia Carroll, Keith Walsh and Stephanie Preisner, and we'll talk to you in September about Keith's choice. And if you want to discover more, check out newstalk.com/Eason's Book Club.